here we go. The background is a concept that was very important in the United States for the programs of the United States after the Second World War. The concept of the takeoff, set out in Walt Rostow's book of 1960, Stages of Economic Growth, a non-communist manifesto. This idea was supposed to be the free world's answer to the communist threat. The communists were promising equality for everybody and faster economic growth. Here's how the Westerners would do it. It is possible to identify all societies in their economic dimensions as lying within one of 5 categories: the traditional society, the preconditions for takeoff, wow, the drive to maturity, and the age of high mass consumption. That's what the US had achieved in England and Germany, right? And now, with foreign aid, the third world, we didn't call it the third world yet, but India would achieve it. And that's how India would outstrip China, right? India was the free world, China was the communist world. So we, the US, with our foreign aid and our technological advice, that would be win-win capitalism. Everybody would get better off through the takeoff. And that's where India is now. She's taking off, right? That's the concept. But towards the end of the 60s, there was at the level of the United Nations, a shock. The idea that development and growth should be equated was called into question. Yes? And that's where Mahbub-ul-Haq and Amartya come in. Yes? Haq said, we were taught to take care of our GNP, our gross national product, as this would take care of poverty. Now we're going to reverse this and take care of poverty, and that will take care of GNP. If all the poor people get educated and productive, then they'll help produce more, you see. So this is still an issue being debated today, and between Bhagwati and Amartya, right? Bhagwati says, you take care of the GNP, it'll take care of the poverty. Amartya says, no. And Amartya was influenced by his friend, Haq. I'm going to give you some samples of Amartya's writings that show the extent to which he did and did not take account of ecological factors. Here, back at the beginning of his career, he was publishing in one of the early volumes of Economic and Political Weekly, back when it was called just the Economic Weekly, and his first article there, an aspect of Indian agriculture. Yes, and here he comes with the growth of wage-based capital farming. Capitalism is about wages, yes? So this is wage-based farming, as is noted in parts of India, should not necessarily be viewed as progressive, he said. Capitalism coming into agriculture may perhaps not be progressive, because in an economy with structural unemployment, that's India for you, yes? Non-wage family-based farming has some efficiency advantages. This is the good student in an economics course. He's talking about efficiency advantages. Why is it efficient? Because they're working harder in the family. Everybody really tries to make the farm efficient. When they're not on a wage, they're doing it for their family's survival. This makes more productive farms. And capitalist farming doesn't have that. The people on the wage don't really care how productive the farm's going to be as long as they get their salaries. So this was his way of thinking. This has nothing to do with welfare economics. This is standard market economic efficiency kind of thinking. Amartya, 1962, before he became a welfare economist. Yes? He's talking about progressive. It's not progressive because it's not efficient. Yeah. Okay. Well, he changed. He became a welfare economist. Yes. And here he is 22 years later. And he publishes a big book, not his most important book, but it's representative of what he was like in the 80s. And he's way beyond efficiency here. He's talking about capabilities, and he's at Oxford University, and he publishes a book. It's an anthology of his articles, but it's called Resources, Values, and Development. So there's the word resources in the title. Well, if you're an ecologically oriented person, you're going to expect him to talk about ecological, environmental resources. But he doesn't. It's not there. You go to the index, you go to the book, you look for air quality, biodiversity, carbon footprint, depletion. I'm going through the alphabet here. Ecological services, forests, groundwater. It's not there. His concept of resources just didn't go there. His resources were human resources. You see. So it's just not. But there was one environmental issue that was bothering people in England at that time. And he talks about it. And he shows in that book, he could get very concerned. Now, he was talking about discount. You know what discount is according to Hotelling's concept of discount? You have some money, and you want to know how much you should spend on this and that. Well, you measure what you can do with this money against what happens if you put it in a savings account. And you'll have more money later on. Each year you'll get 5% more. That means in 20 years it'll be double. Less than 20 years, you'll have twice as much. Can you get twice as much back by spending it on something productive or not? You see, this is discounting. So you discount future values according to balancing them off of what you'd get anyway if you just put it in a savings account. Right? This was a standard discounting. And then he's talking about whether you can do discounting for, and this is called social benefit cost analysis. He's a welfare economist, right? And what about investing in these nuclear power plants, you see? And he says these investments are not merely capital intensive and therefore sensitive to discount rates. You have to put money in to get the thing. Would it be better to just put it in a savings account? You have more money later than you get from production of energy? No. They also involve considerable risks of environmental pollution, these nuclear power plants. Despite safeguards against accidents, one cannot assume that the probability of accidents is going to be zero. Over time, accidents are difficult to rule out. The accidents that have occurred illustrate that not all possibilities are foreseen. In fact, in fast breeder reactors, the possibility of the failure of normal control mechanisms opens up the eventuality of what is technically a nuclear explosion, though the growth of the chain reaction would be slow compared to that which occurs in a nuclear bomb, and energy release would be correspondingly less. If the reactor containment fails to cope with, he's talking about details of ecological danger of these power plants, exactly the issues is agitating today that some of the people who are protesting against them, right? And he starts quoting literature, do you understand? And the Royal Commission on Environment, and he says the cost and utility calculus cannot begin to convey the complexity of choices surrounding investment in nuclear power. Well, this is a guy talking about in environmental and ecological concerns in detail, citing the literature. If he were concerned, he could do it. It's not that he didn't know how to do it. It just didn't occur to him to talk about it in regard to anything else other than the nuclear thing, because that was an issue that Bertrand Russell had made very, and the Gandhi Peace Foundation and so on, had made very present in the mentality there at Oxford University in the 1980s. He could do it. He just didn't do it very much. Now we come to the real crux. Now he's advising the United Nations. He's not yet got his award, Nobel Award. He's being elected president of the American Economic Association in this very same year. And he publishes a paper for the United Nations on sustainable human development. Now, the term sustainable development had come in 1992. I think it's a Trojan horse, that term. Right? But he puts his twist on it, sustainable human development. You got it? Okay, this is Amartya. You know enough about Amartya to know this is the man, right? Concepts and priorities. And he writes it with a colleague, Sudhir Anand. Okay, and this is what they said. The fact of substitutability. You know what substitutability is? We don't send letters today, we send emails, right? Okay? You can always find some other technique for doing the same thing, right? But we don't eat fruit, we take a pill for our vitamins instead. That's a substitute, yes? Substitutability. The fact of substitutability in both production and consumption implies that what we are obligated to leave behind is a generalized capacity to create well-being, not any particular thing or any particular resource. The oil runs out, we'll find something else. For everything we lose, we'll find a substitute. That's ridiculous. There's certain things you can't substitute for. Do you understand? This is an absurdly weak statement for Amartya to make, for an economist of his stature to make this. He just he let his colleague, in my humble opinion, I speculate, write this sentence and he forgot to strike it out. Where did he get this idea? We do not know what the tastes and preferences of future generations will be and what they will do. We must trust the wisdom of the market to solve these problems, right? We don't know. We can't plan ahead. We don't have to leave anything particular. Well, of course you damn well do. You have to leave oxygen. You have to leave H2O. You understand? This was the weakest point. Where did he get this idea? He got it from Robert Solow. Robert Solow he got a Nobel Prize in economics. And in one of his papers, for which he got the award, he wrote in the first page of the paper, "The world has been exhausting its exhaustible resources since the first caveman chipped a flint." Right? That was an exhaustible resource. There's not that much stone and flint in the world, right? "And I imagine the process will go on for a long, long time, period." He was only worried about exhaustion, depletion of Solow. He wasn't worried about pollution or anything else like that. Long, long time. End of story. That was his view. It is very easy, this is in a famous paper by Solow. This is one of his two most famous statements. If it is very easy to substitute other factors for natural resources, if that's the case, if it's very easy to substitute, then the world can, in effect, get along without natural resources. What kind of world did he mean? Did he mean the natural world can get along without natural resources? If that's what he meant, they would have put him in the loony bin. They wouldn't have given him a Nobel Prize. He was making a distinction between the human world, which is not part of the natural world in his thinking, and the human world get along without natural resources. It's almost as crazy, but they gave him a Nobel Prize for this argument. Yes? If, on the other hand, real output per unit of natural resources cannot exceed some upper limit of productivity, if that's the case, then catastrophe is unavoidable. So why worry? It's doomed anyway, right? So this is a way of excluding worries about environmental resources. Either we can get along without them, or it's hopeless anyway, so why bother, you see? Now, in this section about environmental resources, in this paper by Amartya and Anand, they quote various other theorists. None of them are quoted more than twice, except Solow, who was quoted 7 times. And Solow admired Amartya. Solow said, "Amartya is the conscience as our profession." And they were both concerned with human resources. Solow was the man who first brought in his equations, a third factor besides capital and labor. And the third factor was the quality of labor, the quality of education, right? And Amartya is in that area. They didn't bring in a fourth factor for ecology, but they brought in the third factor. And so, in a way, Solow and Amartya are in the same general phase of economic theory, and Amartya is being strongly influenced by Solow's thinking here. Here is Solow, and here's the pivotal reason why Amartya is going to be not talking about ecological concerns. Solow. If you are concerned about people who are currently poor, well, that's Amartya. Yeah. If you are concerned, it will turn out that your concern for them will translate into an increase in consumption. They'll consume more. The logic of sustainability says, however, that thinking about poor people today will be disadvantageous from the point of view of sustainability. There's an opportunity cost crunch between looking after the poor today and looking after the unborn and the children of tomorrow, poor and rich. Yes? There's a crunch. This whole sustainability thing, this is an elite concern of the rich. They're worried about their children and grandchildren. Let the poor today eat cake. Do you understand the issue that he's raising here? Solow is raising here. He's raising this in an essay, a paper that he gave in reaction against the Club of Rome's report of 1972. He didn't like that report at all, and this is part of his reaction. Intellectually, there is no difficulty in resolving that paradox, but practically there is every difficulty in the world in resolving that paradox, and I do not have the vaguest notion how it can be done in practice. That's where Amartya is getting his question. You see, he has a good reason, Amartya. And here's what he says in that essay, 1994. The moral obligation underlying sustainability is an injunction to preserve the capacity for future people to be as well off as we are. This has a terribly hollow ring if it is not accompanied by a moral obligation to protect and enhance the well-being of the present people who are poor and deprived. Any instrumental justification for human development is not gripped by some impersonal objective such as conserving the environment, but relates concretely to people's ability to generate for themselves more income and other means of good living. That's the way he put it. It's very inelegant. It was put much better by Norman Borlaug. You know who he was? Norman Borlaug? He's the inventor of the Green Revolution. He's the man who developed all those new plants and everything that saved India and much of the rest of the world from starvation in the 1970s. And in recent years, Norman Borlaug hasn't been getting the kind of support from foundations that he used to get because people are worried about the ecological downsides of the Green Revolution. It's causing the water tables to fall, using artificial fertilizers too much, right? So he's not getting the kind of support he used to get. This was a great man who got the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize in 1970 because he put off this. This was a great man, but look what he's saying now, 10 years ago. What is it? 7 years ago, 14 years ago. Some of the environmental lobbyists in the Western nations are the salt of the earth. But many of them are elitists. They've never experienced the physical sensation of hunger. They do their lobbying from comfortable office suites in Washington or Brussels. If they lived just 1 month amid the misery of the developing world, as I have for 50 years, they'd be crying out for tractors and fertilizer and irrigation canals. And they'd be outraged that fashionable elitists back home were trying to deny them these things for the sake of sustainability. You understand, this is much more helpful. This is a great man, right? That's the crunch that was gripping Amartya. That was his good reason for not wandering into those waters. You understand, he was afraid of that. You understand what I'm saying? Amartya came to New Delhi in 2006 to participate in a meeting of the International Society for Ecological Economics, the head of which at that time was Sagar's good friend and mine, Don Martinez Ali. And here they are sitting there, right? The 9th Biennial Conference of the International Society for Ecological Economics, right? 2006, December, right? And Amartya gave a talk, and Sarda, H.M. Sarda said, "The need of the hour is degrowth." Yes? Don't you agree? And Amartya said, "India certainly needs more growth." No, I don't. He was polite, but he was decisive. He meant more GDP. More GDP. But then, 3 years later, here comes the report. This is the report with Stiglitz about how GDP is a mismeasure. A mismeasure. Yes? You know about this famous report, commissioned by the President of France, Sarkozy, an evaluation of GDP as a way of measuring. Yeah? And Amartya was very concerned about public health. He has an office at Harvard University. He has an office in the economics department, an office in the philosophy department, and an office in the School of Public Health. That's what he's been mainly researching in recent years, public health issues. And in this report, it's full of public health stuff at the right places in the report. I think it comes from Amartya. I can't guess exactly who wrote what, but the burden of disease due to environmental factors is estimated at 24% of the total burden of disease by WHO. Here's the environmental effect on the health of the poor today. This is Amartya. Children bear a disproportionate share of the burden of environmentally related disease as they ingest or breathe more pollution per unit of body weight than adults who are exposed to the same contradictions. This is Amartya, yes? And then they have a list here. I can't read it all to you. Environmental effects on human health. And he goes on, outdoor air pollution, and then he has blah, 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 20, 30 friends, indoor air pollution, blah, blah, industrial chemicals, endocrine disruptors. I mean, this is a big list. This is Amartya paying attention to ecological and environmental factors in regard to health for the people today. 2009, he's getting worried about it. And then he has these tables. Premature deaths from air pollution per million inhabitants, not only today, in 2000, but also estimated for 2030. Now he's looking forward, one generation, right? And in different countries. Yes, in China today, the estimate is about 5 million, but it's going to get up to 40 million in 2030. And over here is, look at this, so on. These are two kinds of pollution, right? Affecting people's health today and in the future, Right? He's not talking about it, we don't know what their tastes and preferences are going to be. He's talking about what's going to happen to these people, regardless of their tastes and preferences. Yeah? So you see there's a sensitivity here that Amartya is developing. Yes? They have a little supplementary report. Just the three of them, Stiglitz, Amartya, and Fitoussi. This big report was written by a whole team of 20 or 30 people. There was only one who had anything to do with ecological economics. All the others were welfare and market economists. The deck was stacked not to favor environmental ecological economics, but the three of them then wrote their own little thing. Yeah? Reflections and overview. We know that the way we are as an international community, the way we as an international community have conducted ourselves is not sustainable. We know that it is impossible for the world as we know it to survive if current patterns of living and production continue, and even more so if they are extended to the billions of the developing world. How do you reconcile that with India certainly needs more development? How did they know? They didn't have the statistics. There are too many uncertainties to know, at least they thought so. How did they know? You understand? This is Amartya's in between here. You understand? He's coming over to the concerns. Yeah. That's the... Now we come to the book of 2013 with Jean Drèze. Jean Drèze is a great man. There's no question about that. But this book does not do justice to the ecological problems. And here's what they have toward the beginning of their little 4-page section on environmental issues. Now watch the wording here, it's very tricky. In recent decades, all over the world, perceptions have dramatically changed. Perceptions have changed. Not realities, perceptions. And indeed, it is hard to think of a subject that generates as much concern today among reflective people everywhere as the serious vulnerability of the environment in which we live. The environment is vulnerable. But what about us? Are we vulnerable? People are deeply worried about how human lives can continue to prosper, even perhaps continue at all, in the form that we now know them, if the depletion of our environment continues as fast as it is right now. People are worried. But they don't say they're worried. Do you understand? They say, oh, it's a subject everybody's talking about, but they don't say, here. You see, it's just, you could accuse them of Brahmanism here, of sophistry, if you wanted to, yeah? But then they do say, there are huge reasons to be worried about our treatment of the environment and its implications for the lives that people can lead in this increasingly polluted, it's not just emptying the bucket. It's pollution, overloading the pollution. An environmentally devastated country. A sharp fall in water tables. Rivers reduced to a trickle or to sewage drains. Mining activities. Destroying forests. Damage likely to accelerate in the near future. This looks like this book is really going to get into it. You see? Then you read the rest of the book. There's not a single statistic about it anywhere in the book. Yes, it's like Namo saying, I was full of anguish. You understand? Here's the statement, and then you read the rest of the book, and there's no follow-up. Yeah? And you'll find them saying things like this in the book. This is Amartya who had written that GDP is a mismeasure. Yes? Now he's saying, during the last 20 years, the Indian economy has done very well in terms of the growth of GDP, about 6.7% per year. GDP growth 1% a year, means doubling the size of the economy in 70 years. It's like compound interest. Doesn't take 100 years, takes only 70. 6% means doubling the size of the economy in 12 years. 6 into 72 is 12, right? Do you think the Indian economy can double its size every 12 years indefinitely into the future? It's crazy. He's saying this is a good thing. There is an urgent need for paying more attention to the environmental damage that has accompanied this rapid growth, but India's new economic dynamism makes it possible to pursue more responsible environmental policies along with reasonably high rates of growth. So they're fudging a little bit. They say it's possible, but then they don't discuss how these possibilities are going to be realized. This would require more political science than they're willing to go into in the book. What they want to do in that book is to make you realize that the poor are getting the short end of the stick, right? But they don't talk about how to actually implement these possible more in other words, it's too fuzzy. It's too fuzzy. And that's what, yes, and here's another one. There certainly is a lot of discussion, not just in the business media, of the need to raise the rate of growth of the Indian economy, which has fallen from its peak of 9% back to so on and so forth. This growth, let me skip down here, it generates public revenue that can be used to expand social and physical infrastructure as well as for other constructive purposes. Yes, constructive purposes, but what about the destruction, alas? See, it's all positive thinking here. This is a retreat from the position that Amartya, together with Stiglitz and the others, had achieved just 4 years earlier in the French report. That is a little sad for Amartya. No? These are wonderful people. And Partha Dasgupta then goes after them for this. He says what they said about this is just banal generalities. In his review, he says they're banal, just banal. He says this, and he's reviewing in the same book their book and Bhagwati's book. You know about Bhagwati's book, saying we just increase the GNP and let the welfare take care of itself. We don't pay any attention to distribution, to helping the poor. We don't have a food security. We don't do anything about schools, says Bhagwati. No, it'll all take care of itself. This is the wisdom of the market. This is Hayek and kind of stuff. Yeah. He's reviewing both books at once, Partha Dasgupta, and he says, despite the vastly contrasting readings of the Indian experience, the analyses in the two books are based on a shared belief, one that is hallowed by tradition, but is, I am sorry to say, utterly misconceived. The model implicit in the books is one where labor, more broadly human capital, knowledge, and manufactured capital are the basis of production, exchange, and consumption. Only three factors: capital, labor, and quality, knowledge. It's that third factor that Solau had first introduced with his so-called factor A back in the 70s. Yep. Nature doesn't get a look in except as a bit player. That's the fundamental error. They have only three factors, they ought to have four. Okay? You with me here? I'm talking broad generalities. Exactly how that third factor is defined is something to be discussed and analyzed, but basically it's this way. And now here comes Arrow working with Partha Dasgupta in the 21st century. And they're coming up with a new definition of wealth. This is interesting from the point of view of personalities and great economists. By wealth, I mean the social worth. So there's the welfare aspect. The social worth of an economy's stock of capital assets. Wealth is what you've got, not what you're getting every year. Wealth is something that's there, not something that's flowing in. Okay. And it comprises manufactured capital, roads, ports, machinery, and so on. Yes. Human capital, that includes the people, and their composition, their education, their health. That's the factor that Solau first introduced. Yeah. Knowledge, the arts, humanities, the sciences, techniques, technology, and fourth factor, natural capital, ecosystems, sources of water, atmosphere, land, subsoil resources, and so on. So now it's a new evaluation of wealth. It's those four things filtered through an evaluation of their social worth. Okay? That's his definition of wealth. if institutions, such as governments, are weak or simply bad, then the social worth of these assets would be small, and that would translate into a low figure for wealth. Okay? So it's not just enough that the stock is there, it has to be properly functioning socially owing to good institutions. So we don't want the corruption, we don't want this and that. No. Okay. Kenneth Arrow and a team and I arrived in 2010 in a working paper at the very tentative estimate that during 1995 to 2000, wealth per head in India increased at an average annual rate of less than one-fifth of 1%. Less than 1/5 of 1%. This was a numerical estimate. They put in a whole bunch of numbers. By the way, a very, very complicated reckoning. Yeah? A far cry from the high rates of growth in GDP per head during that same period. The GDP was growing several percent. And here the actual wealth increase was only one-fifth of 1%, a much lower figure. Yeah. Basically flat. Even that low figure is in all likelihood an overestimate. Because what did we do in our reckoning? Among natural capital assets, we were able to include only forests as sources of timber, but not for the many ecological services they provide. Well, my God, they provide the photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is what makes the Earth different from Mars, my friends. It's a very, very important eco-service provided by the forests that they didn't calculate for. They were only evaluating the timber in the forests. This is a leftover from what's called environmental economics. Where are you going to get what you're going to put in the factory? That's environmental economics as opposed to ecological economics. So they didn't have that in, and why didn't they do it? Because they didn't have any data for it. That's why. Yeah. So we had forests as sources of timber. We had carbon in the atmosphere because the World Bank is publishing carbon dioxide figures. We have land and subsoil resources. A great swath of ecosystems and sources of water, which many studies show have degraded in recent years. You know, there are a lot of statistics about the water tables going down all over India, here and there. You know. Lots of places in India, it's going down a meter a year in recent years. This is horrendous, horrendous. This is a terrible loss of wealth that these water tables are going down. Those were left unaccounted for in our study of 2010 because national data were simply not available. We should conclude that wealth per head in India may well have declined in recent decades. That's not about the future, that's right now. Right now. If you take into account these factors, wealth is declining in India. You're getting sicker because of the air. You're not going to have the electricity. You used to have it every day now, and so on. Here, you used to have it every day. You know, it's different in the villages, maybe, so on and so on. Now, that kind of reckoning, where you take all four categories, and you come up with a single number for it, this is the technical name for this. It's called weak sustainability reckoning. I don't like the terminology. I don't think there's anything weak about it, but that's what it's called. And the opposite, where you take account of each factor in its own right, is called strong sustainability reckoning. Now, strong sustainability is the way a doctor reckons when you come in. See, and he's checking your health. He doesn't add up your blood pressure to your, he says this counts for so much, and your temperature counts for so much, and the cell count for this and that, and then he gives you a number for your health. No, if you have appendicitis, that's something you have to tend to right there, no matter how good the blood count is in the health. You see, if you take account of each factor in its own right, that's called strong sustainability reckoning, and that's a basic premise of ecological economics. You have to do that. And that goes back, in my humble opinion, to a principle that was made famous in the 19th century by a man named von Liebig, who invented artificial fertilizers. And he was talking about plants. He didn't invent this concept. He got the concept from someone else. Sorry, pardon me. He invented artificial fertilizers, but he did not invent the precept I'm about to talk about. Limit the rate at which the plant can grow. It's going to be the one chemical that is short of the amount that's needed. That's the one that stunts the growth. If the others have enough or more than enough available, then so it's the one factor. You see, that's related to strong sustainability reckoning. And that's the way we ought to reckon in terms of ecological economics. Just take vitamins. Right? We can't say my total vitamin count is higher than the total. No, I have to have the amount of vitamin A, the amount of vitamin B1, the amount of each one. That's strong sustainability type reckoning. Partha Dasgupta and Solal and Kenneth Arrow, they're doing weak sustainability, putting it all in one bucket. Amartya and Joseph Stiglitz understood very clearly that that kind of reckoning has certain uses and strong sustainability reckoning is also necessary. They knew that in the 2009 report. I don't have time to read this, but they have a whole essay here about weak sustainability and strong sustainability, and they talk about where these concepts came in and what they're useful for. So theoretically, they're more online for certain purposes than Partha Dasgupta and Kenneth Arrow and their team are, right? And they say, preserving the well-being of future generations requires simultaneously maintaining levels for many environmental assets rather than summing up a global combination. See, so they're correct about that, in my humble opinion. Now, so I've given you a picture of the complexities of Amartya's position, the ins and outs. He's wavering, hovering between this and that, and there's been a real retraction, a real step backwards in the 2013 book from the position that they had attained in 2009. Why is he held back? First of all, he has the dream of the great future, and this dream goes back to earlier phases of capitalism. Keynes put it this way in 1929, the future holds in store for us far more wealth and economic freedom and possibilities of personal life. There's Keynes talking about capabilities than the past has ever offered. This is the dream. Amartya wants to cling to that dream. Yes, he still has it. He's worried about the opportunity cost crunch between allocating resources to the poor today and to the babies and the unborn. Now, I've talked about that with Solal. He got that from Solal. And Solal taught him this is a problem that if in practice it's going to be so hard to reconcile, you better not try. Amartya is unwilling to ask the athlete to cut back. He would lose his popularity. That's a slight failure of character. So he's hoping that all the radical pessimists, all the sagars, will happen to be mistaken in their dire predictions, because Paul Ehrlich was terribly mistaken. Paul Ehrlich wrote a famous book, 1968, The Population Bomb, in which he predicted that there would be mass starvation in the 1970s. The battle to feed all of humanity is over, 1968. In the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people were starved to death. It did not happen because of Norman Borlaug and all those people. Paul Ehrlich was wrong. Other doomsayers have been wrong, right? And Amartya is hoping, well, let's take care of the poor today, and let's hope the doomsayers are wrong. You see how I'm trying to analyze, trying to mind read it? Yeah. And to do this, unfortunately, to talk about these future problems, you cannot do it with risk assessment the way unwilling to delve into theorizing about uncertainties. An insurance company makes money by having a good risk assessment of the future based on statistics of the past. But if you know the future is going to be very different from the past, you can't assess risk. You have something else, uncertainty. That's why insurance companies don't offer policies for acts of God. Those are uncertain. Well, your lives and your children's lives are going to be full of uncertainties because of ecological problems, right? We don't really know how bad these things are going to be. We don't know how many of these nuclear power plants are going to blow up. We don't know how bad the global warming and the farming is going to be, how uncertain. We heard Goswami and his paper, and he said this is the best meteorologist in India, and he said it's twice as hard to predict monsoons today as it was back in the 1970s, and he showed statistics showing you. I don't know what's going to happen. We're full of uncertainties. Amartya didn't want to sink into those uncertainties. Amartya's technique was to skirt the uncertainties, point out they existed, not delve into them, so that whatever he published would be solid, and that way he'll get the prize. You see what I mean? So I've tried to mind read Amartya. We want to understand him because he's a great and good man. We want to understand why he's wrong, and we want to understand, want to understand the ways in which he is wrong, and we want to also understand why he got into a wrong position. In my essay, I have a 43-page essay I've written with Desarda about Amartya on ecological economics, in which I go into more detail than I did today. Part of the problem here is that with these uncertainties, we have an additional problem. The stakes are high. There's a difference to what you do when your uncertainties are about high stakes, compared to what you do when the uncertainties are about low stakes. You have an uncertainty that somebody might splash something on you. You see, you don't worry about that. The stakes are low. When the stakes are high, you should be more careful. Understand? If the stakes are low, if the risk is low, if the stakes are low, you can run a 50% risk. It's no big deal. But if the stakes are high, you shouldn't run such a high risk. You understand my point? And when we're talking about some of these ecological problems of pollution coming down the road, we're talking about, catastrophes, maybe extinction of humankind within a couple of 100 years and so on. These are high stakes. We shouldn't run a palpable risk about that. It is crazy to risk for very high stakes unless there's no way you can avoid risking, unless not doing something is also dangerous. The way I put it is this. So I wanted to bring in the issue of high stakes, the role of stakes in doing this. You all know the story of the boy who cried wolf. You know the story, yes? Anybody who doesn't know the fable of the boy who cried wolf? Do you know it? There was a village, and a wolf was coming and killing people in the village, and so they had the boy as the watchdog, as the watchguard, and he called wolf, wolf, and there wasn't any wolf, yes? And later, the wolf did come, and he called wolf, wolf, and they said, oh, it's just that boy again, and the wolf ate them all up, yeah? Who made the bigger mistake? The boy or the villagers? The villagers made the really big mistake. Yeah? It doesn't matter that Paul Ehrlich was wrong. You see my point? No. Just because Paul Ehrlich was wrong in 1968 doesn't mean that we don't have a problem of that kind today. Maybe he was just a little bit ahead of his time in his prediction. He overestimated something. He didn't realize about Norman Borlaug. Didn't realize about the Green Revolution, but now we had the Green Revolution. It put off the starvation, but now we're having the dark side of the Green Revolution. The water tables in India are going down at a horrible rate, partly because of the Green Revolution, right? The problems are coming back. You see my point? So let's not be foolish like the villagers were when they ignored the boy when he was right.
Okay, let me get the ball rolling.
Please.
Would you call Amartya Sen a person who believes in sustainable capitalism?
Essentially, I think he hopes. Yes, I would say so.
Okay.
I think so.
Next question. Would you put, if you've seen Ashish Kothari and
Yes, yes.
Asim Srivastav's book,
Yeah.
would you put them also into the same category?
No, they're in between somewhere. I would put them in between. I don't think they've cast their lot. You see, the command economies were our model of socialism. Historical model of socialism are the command economies, Soviet Russia, yes? And Soviet Russia didn't do very well. It looked like they were going to be growing faster for a period, and then it all collapsed, yes? But there was, have you heard of Oskar Lange? Oskar Lange, do You know who he was? Have you heard of him? He was a professor of economics at the University of Chicago, thank you. And he was Polish, and he gave up his professorship and went back to Poland after the Second World War, after the Germans and Russians were gone and the borders were shifted, and he went back to try to help Poland build socialism. And Stalin appreciated Oscar Lange very much. And he had a debate with, had a running debate in letters with Hayek, Friedrich von Hayek, called the Socialist Calculation Debate. Yes? And he came up with the concept of market socialism. At the heavy industry decisions would be made by central planning boards, but the production and distribution of consumer products would be made in consultation with local boards who would check which things are selling out at this price, which things are not selling out, and by artificial feedback of the kind of information that the market automatically comes back with price and amount, there would be a way of adjusting the rate of manufacture of consumer goods. This was his general idea. And he elaborated on this, and he was unable ever to get this done his way, because he was in Poland, who was full of troops from Soviet Russia, and the bureaucrats were against him. So his ideas never really got a fair trial. It might be, I think that whole debate should be revisited. Now, to some extent, it does exist, to some extent, in India, because you do have 5-year plans, centrally laid out 5-year plans with goals, and the government supports these goals in this way and invests, and you have government firms and all that, but you have a market in India. So there's a kind of mixed economy, yeah? And so this is realistically the area that we can hope for. Now, there was a fine book written in, I think it was a man from Pune, called Eco-Socialism or Capitalist Socialism, which is better. And the premise of the book was we have to have the revolution first, and then we can have the ecological salvation, you see. The socialist revolution must come first. Capitalism cannot solve the problem. Therefore, first we must have socialism brought in, then we can hope to solve the ecological problems. But it's not going to happen that way. There's not going to be a socialist revolution. We have to try to do it with such as we have. We have to nibble away at capitalism. That's my position. Right? It's unrealistic. It's utopian to say, let's have socialism first and then we can solve our ecological problem. That's not what's going to happen in India. It's not what's going to happen in the USA. Understand? We got this capitalism. My solution is that the capitalists have to become frightened. They have to have nightmares every night about what this ecological pestilence is going to do. And they have to decide they want to do it. And the consumers have to decide. The great Indian middle class, the great American middle class, the great Chinese middle class. They have to be really upset about those floods in England, those fires out in California, those hurricanes in Kansas, right? Those cyclones in Andhra Pradesh and West Bengal and so on. When everybody really gets upset, right? Then, regardless of the governmental system, there will be pressure to do something. The pressure will be resisted, as it has been, by certain big corporations that are just making a lot of money. And apart from the corporations producing things, President Coca-Cola now, by the way, is concerned about water pollution. Have you heard it? Have you read this story? Those are resisting. And there's been a whole attempt, this whole global warming is a myth theme in the USA. This is not an accident that this became the slogan of the Republican Party. This was a plan. There will be resistance by vested interests, no question about it. This resistance has to be overcome by people within the vested interests becoming scared. That's my position. Love alone cannot do it. It must be fear. I'm sorry, you heard all this last night. People come together when they have an enemy in common. In wartime, they drop their quarrels. They come together. Yes, in the US we did it after 9/11. In India against the British. In England against the Germans. They come together. We have to be afraid of Mother Nature. We have to see her as our enemy.
How do you reconcile this position that there will be sort of adjustments within capitalism?
I don't say there will be. I say there hope there will be. It's the only way it can happen. If it doesn't,
with the earlier Hubbard's curve that you presented, basically oil is getting over, and so is gas, and so is
you're talking about depletion now. I'm talking about pollution, global warming. They have to be frightened not just about depletion. Depletion is a couple of hundred years away. You're having bad monsoons already, because of global warming. Global warming is wrecking the agriculture. I think forms of pollution are going to become really scary before the depletion of the fossil fuels becomes a terribly big issue, in my humble opinion. I can't say it's for sure, but that seems to me to be the issue. We can hardly eat. You go on the web today, you look up fish. The American government tells you what kinds of fish you can eat and can't eat. The bigger fish are all so poisoned with mercury, you can't even eat the bigger fish today without getting mercury poisoning. Well, this is going to get worse and worse. Soon you're not going to be able to eat fish. That's a major source of nutrition for a lot of people, right? And once the fish goes, then, I'm sorry.
Your position is one hope against somebody else's hope. Somebody believes in social revolution, you believe in some adjustment capitalism.
Well, I don't believe in it. I just say socialism isn't going to happen.
Sure, but that's what. But your hope that something will happen within capitalism, that's also equally hope. It is no different from other. And I think the only place where something has happened is Cuba.
I think the criticism is unfair.
No,
I'm just saying that we can't sit.
There's no evidence that something will happen within capitalism either. There's no evidence of your hope.
There is some evidence. There is some.
On the other hand,
okay, just a minute. Just a minute. Let me offer the evidence that it is happening. Okay? The big capitalists, the right-wing economists, Gregory Mankiw, Robert Rubin, yes? The president of Coca-Cola, they're all calling for a carbon tax now. They all want a Pigouvian tax on carbon, yes? That is a progressive step. The carbon tax might work well, who knows? We don't know. They all want it. That's a big change. You can say a lot of bad things about Mr. Obama, but he's better than Mr. Romney. He's better than Romney would have been. And Romney, when he took the Republican nomination, he made fun of global warming, right? He ridiculed it with scorn, and the whole Republican convention were giggling with scornful contempt of the concept of global warming, right? And a week later, Mr. Obama finally had the courage to mention global warming. He hadn't dared mention it before because of all this propaganda about it, yes? And he said global warming is not a joke. Those hurricanes are not a joke. Yes, and if you want to do something about it, vote for me. And by chance, it happened there was a terrible storm in New York City 2 days before the election, and Mr. Obama won by less than 1% of the vote in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois. Do you understand? It could be the election could have gone the other way. It could be that hit that election. Do you understand my point? American people are beginning to catch on to this issue of global warming. Once they really care, then no matter what the governmental system, there's not going to be a socialist revolution in the United States. You understand? That's not going to happen. Goodbye, Karl Marx. You understand? That's what I'm saying. Now, India has a system.
It's an assertion. I mean, it's just an assertion. I don't see any evidence of it. And the only place where something has happened is Cuba, to current situation.
But now it's going back the other way in Cuba. I mean, Cuba. The whole world's not going to be like Cuba.
And secondly, irrespective of what happened in the USA, what's going to happen here? I'm not bothered what
No, it's very different here.
I'm bothered what's happened in Hyderabad.
Well, it's very different here. Of course, it's very different here. Yeah. Everything, I mean, I like to say everything in India happens too little, too late. And everything in China happens too much, too soon. Yes? And they have horrible pollution in China. Yeah, and people really upset about what they've got. And besides, because of this, they have whole cities that were built that nobody can live in. They've made big mistakes in China. Yeah, is that really the way to go? It has to be some kind of middle way.
But horrible consumers in the USA. What do I care about it? They are consuming such a lot of things from the rest of the world. And anyway, it's US people to bother about things. I'm bothered about what is going to happen here.
Yeah.
And I don't see the US consuming less in food.
But do you think
they're consuming so much?
Do you think the Naxalites are going to take over here?
What I'm saying that your position is no different from, it's just one hope against another hope.
I think that's a metaphysical point. I think in reality it's different.
I personally think that different parts of the world will have different solutions.
That's true. That's true.
I don't think what may or may not happen in USA will happen in India, or what may or may not happen in China will happen in India. I think each part of the world is different, each has different history, and there are different solutions.
But there has to be international cooperation on these big
I
issues.
don't think the days of international is gone. It's localism is what's going to happen. With what you said about peak oil, all that.
There I disagree with you. I don't think the problem of global warming can be solved, can be addressed properly without international cooperation.
I don't think that you can do anything about global warming. Nobody is doing anything about global warming, and nothing will happen. The only way something will happen is peak oil and the collapse of capitalist economy. That is the only solution to global warming. Without collapse of capitalist economy, there is no chance of global warming because the consumption is very high and will remain high in capitalism.
That's an interesting
global warming is
position.
related to consumption of oil. So the only solution is the collapse of capitalist economy. There is no other solution.
So you see no validity to the degrowth movement?
Pardon?
To the degrowth movement. You see no point in having a degrowth movement. You know about the degrowth movement?
What?
Degrowth.
No, there are just transition movements are there in towns. I'm aware of the.
It's pointless.
No, I think that.
That's okay.
Okay.
I think that there are local solutions.
Yours is
let me change the
position. It's an interesting position. Yes. Okay. I take account of it. Yes.
One question.
Please.
I don't have about degrowth, but it sounds like, see, in capitalism, when there is a degrowth, there is also less production, right?
Yes.
Then there is, with the high production, we are having very less employment, right?
Well, it depends on the work week. Depends on how long people are working. If you have degrowth with the same efficiency and the same work hours, that's one thing. But suppose people decide they don't want to work full time. In Germany and the Netherlands today, I mentioned this last night, yes? You're working a full time, okay? And you're getting a good salary and you have medical care and an old age pension plan. And now you go to your boss and you say, I want to live more simply. I want a lower paycheck. I want to work only 20 hours a week.
Okay.
Your boss has to let you do it by law. And people are doing it. And you keep your medical care and your old age pension. That's degrowth. That's benign degrowth. That's what we want. We want all the affluent people to simplify little by little so they're consuming less. Yes? Little by little, so then we don't have to suddenly have terrible big changes when the cyclone comes. That's a big change. The people in England, they're walking around up to their heels, up to their knees in water today. Yes, that's a big change. We don't want that. We want a lot of little changes. This is the degrowth movement. Juan Martinez Allier and company. Sagar is into this. Yes, this is a hope, the degrowth movement. And then one is trying to combine this. John is the proper pronunciation. He's trying to combine this with the environmental justice movement. He wants all these peasants all over the world who are getting the short end of the stick through the internet to come into coalition with the degrowth movement. Yes? And insist. Now, I don't think the U.S. is ever going to pay reparations. But the U.S. is already, for instance, paying Brazil money every year. The Brazilian government is getting billions of dollars from the U.S. as a reward for not cutting down more of the jungle. Yeah? You understand? You can call it capitalism, socialism, what you want. I agree. Socialism is a term with a lot of baggage attached to it, historically. Capitalism, too. The central economy, central planning economy, like in the Soviet Union, they failed. So in that sense, if that's what you mean by socialism, Bolshevism, let's call it Bolshevism, it failed. Capitalism is today failing. That's happening. Something else has to come. What you're going to call it, I don't know. But it's not going to be created by another Marxist revolution, in my humble opinion. It's not going to be a whole bunch of people come up and storm the palace and kill a bunch of people and then everything is good. That kind of destruction. I have a Gandhian friend, a wonderful guy in New Delhi. Do you know him, Anand? Y.P. Anand? He was the head of the Indian Railway Board for a while, and he was the head of the Gandhi Museum. I once interviewed Mahatma. Do you know who he was? The majority whip in the Lok Sabha. And I mentioned to him I was a friend of Anand and Mahatma. This was 15 years ago. He raised his finger and he said, I remember him. He's the one who took nothing. The one high bureaucrat in the Indian government was ex officio chief advisor to the prime minister who took no bribes. Yes. And he said, whenever violence is used successfully to achieve a political objective, the result is a new situation in which the strong have a new way to oppress the weak. You have these big revolutions. You think you're going to create a brave new world. If you do it with violence, you're going to get into another syndrome. I don't think that's going to solve the problem, in my humble opinion. No.
Mark,
I have a lot of regard for Cuba, for what happened in Cuba. I don't want to denigrate what Cuba achieved. No.
You see, I am all for the degrowth movement.
No.
But the facts are that there has been a continuous growth, in fact at about 2.3% per annum in energy consumption. So in effect right now, the degrowth movement has not been able to make any dent in terms of consumption.
It's only 10 years old. It's only 10 years old, my friend. I mean, this is my
it's
hope.
It's older than that. If you go back.
No, but I mean in terms of international conventions.
Okay, yeah, but in terms of individual thinkers, it's been a much longer thing.
Yeah, but the fact is now they're having an international, and the Society for Ecological Economics has been founded. There have been these, the sensibility is growing.
Yeah.
Whether it's enough in time, that's another issue, but the thing is growing. There's a crest of interest in the sorts of things we're talking about here. It crested in the 1970s. Then there was a regression, and now it's coming back, I think.
Yeah, but again, you see, it's like what I said in Tejpur, that it's not for the developing countries to degrow, but it is for the developed countries to degrow.
Of course.
And how do you do that politically?
Well, yes, of course.
Well,
I think it has to be done by massive fear.
To which you responded,
fear, yes,
saying that the US will have to reduce its consumption by 90%. If India is to get up to, any
to the same
kind of
level. But that logic is perfect. That's good. Let's talk about that. Yes, many Indians say to me, well, the US has so much bigger carbon footprint and ecological footprint than India. There's no point in asking Indian middle class to degrow, to simplify. Well, we're still so far below the level of the Americans. Let them come down. The logic is absolutely impeccable. What will be the result following that logic in India and in China? China's carbon footprint today is the same size as that of the United States. When we talk about world effect of global warming, which is ruining your weather, my friends, ruining your monsoons. The bad weather today is because of what was done in the past. The bad weather tomorrow will be because of what's been done today. Your logic is absolutely impeccable. We don't have to worry about this. It's unfair for us to have to trim our sails while the Americans are still just beginning to simmer down. Yes, but the result of that kind of logic is destructive for your own children and grandchildren.
No. The position that, for example, some of us have taken is that the entire energy consumption has, for the globe as a whole, has to reduce by 60%.
Whatever, yes.
1. 2, that there has to be energy equity, that you have to move towards energy equity.
Yes.
Okay. And that you'll have to dispense with fossil fuels and basically look at essentially the sun for
I agree
future,
with all that.
despite the very recent sort of breakthroughs that have been made in fusion technologies.
That's a pipe dream.
Whatever.
That's a pipe dream. The fusion is a pipe dream.
No, let's forget the fusion
my humble
technology
opinion.
breakthrough.
The fission, the techniques for the fission were developed in 1 week by a team of less than a dozen scientists and engineers in a football stadium in Chicago. Fission is very simple. Fusion, thousands have been working on it for 50 years, and now they have a newspaper story that had a little glimmer.
Statement I
And
made.
with the fission, look at the problems of safety we've had. These plants blowing up. And that's a very simple scheme. The fusion is going to involve much higher risks. The fusion is a pipe dream, in my humble opinion. Wind and solar and tide have much more possibility.
Not much potential.
Well, the sun shines stronger in India than it does in the US. At least Daley got the World Bank to be producing this carbon footprint data. Without him, that wouldn't have happened. Yeah? That's an achievement. Yeah, and he's the co-author of what is, in my opinion, the best textbook in ecological economics. There are defects in that textbook, but Daley has, on balance, been a positive factor in his day.
No doubt about that.
Yeah, that's all I can say. Cuba had a certain situation, and she's paid a terrible price for what she's done. You know, Cuba has suffered a lot because of the American embargo and all this kind of thing. Yeah. And yet. The Cuban people are getting along. Well, Amartya will say, yes, some people from the bottom will come up and get jobs. He's a little mixed. But basically, there is a big trickle-down aspect in it. He is caught in a really contradictory position. He wrote a book which was published under the title GDP is a Mismeasure in 2009, and then his book in 2013, he talked about how we need big GDP. So he's really vulnerable. This is sad. He's an old man. He hasn't had a new thought for the last 5 years. He's an old man. You understand?
But then he worked with Stiglitz in the French government.
That's right.
Under the previous Sarkozy's
That's
government.
right.
About a new form of a GDP.
That's right.
Okay, so maybe he's meaning about this GDP, we don't know.
But
I don't want to
given it up.
support him.
He moved back. I see this book of 2013 as, from that point of view, a regressive step for Amartya, even though he wrote it with
But my
that very
point
great
that I
man,
would-
Jean Dresse, who lives very simply. Jean Dresse is a saint. What Jean Dresse is to India as Norman Bethune was to China. He devoted himself to India. Jean Dresse is a great man. But this book, there are lots of interesting statistics in this book. But it's a very defective book, in my humble opinion. I think Artha's book is correct. I'm sorry, you have a second?
Yeah, no, continue the same thing. The chief economic advisor, even Ragarajan openly says the same statement, that we want the growth to go up maximum, because
That's right.
from there we are going to use it for the
That's true.
welfare measures.
That's Manmohan saying it, and they want. They're
everywhere
saying
it is the
it
same
because they
concept.
believe it and because they want the political contributions from the big money.
Exactly.
You can't run a political party in a parliamentary democracy. Somebody has to pay for the parties. Right? Somebody has to pay for them. This is a structural defect.
Yeah.
Somebody has to pay for the political parties. It's going to be the people with the money. The people with the money are dinosaurs on these other issues, and this is causing the problem.
Right. So
With
point
Mr. Obama as well.
Yeah. And we have the same things here with the lands with the Moily and playing between Moily and Modi. That's all going on here
That's
also.
right. But you know, the AAP got elected, and this man was obviously unfit to govern, but they got elected nonetheless without him. The AAP didn't become it. And they didn't get us
But how are we stating that they are unfit for governance?
We didn't govern very well. We didn't achieve anything.
That depends on how you view it.
But the point is that they
When we
may
believe that
get
they're
more
government.
votes, and they may do it without much money. That's my point. That's a sign of hope.
Okay, so the
It
point
may
is,
be that people are getting so upset in India, they don't care how much advertising is put out in favor of the shining tradition of the Nehrus and all that kind of thing, or the Gandhis, I'm sorry. You understand? It may be that people of India will no longer. It used to be that, you know, so many people in India were illiterate, right, that they voted for the congressman in the name Gandhi, thinking somehow that Sonia was the daughter of the Mahatma. You understand? Those days are over. Maybe the people of India will be a little smarter. This is a sign of hope. I see hope basically in the AAP function.
yeah.
Even though I'm disappointed that Patriotism hasn't been very smooth on it. I wish he had I wish he were as.
No, why do we
But anyway,
expect
these are
streamline
personalities.
sort of- Yeah,
I
that's a
see some
different
hope
topic.
there. I see some hope.
I mean, we
Maybe
see a lot of
big
hope in
money.
this even.
Maybe you can win elections with less big money in India. Yeah.
Okay. So my point was that how were the economists thinking that when all the whole society is not involved in the entire production or the manufacturing or the services, when the whole country is not involved in the GDP, and how are we expecting that the GDP will flow back to all the people, which is not going to happen. So if it is an inclusivity that we are talking about, it should be about that this GDP should be contributed by all these people.
What an interesting, good point. Yes. If production is achieved with efficient labor by only a small portion of the population, how does the rest of the population get some of the benefits of this?
They cannot.
This is a
If
very
they are telling that it will trickle down, or they will deliberately make it trickle down, then it is, it's
or trickle over or whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Very interesting.
That's not right.
The World Bank report says that in India, the people with income, daily income more than $5 is only 3.1%. And so much of poverty has grown in India in 65 years. And how do we solve this with this kind of a model?
It was bad before that. The great famines were worse before that. The malnutrition rate in India is horrendous today, but the famine rate was worse before. This is the point of Amartya Sen.
Even today there is a lot of malnutrition.
He's saying the malnutrition has grown up. Malnutrition has grown up in India, but the famines were worse. That's what everybody is saying.
They were worse.
The famines are worse, but the malnutrition
Have you
is
read the
worse.
famous book Famines in India? No. It was horrendous. I worry about India. India does get enough rain.
Yes.
And India can feed her population.
Yes, we
It
have
is
so much of
possible.
production.
Yeah.
But as Amartya Sen has pointed out in his book, it is about the purchasing parity.
Yes,
The
that's right.
purchasing power that is lacking in the people. That's what he pointed in his novel narrated book also. That in the famine, it was not the unavailability of food, but it was unavailability of the purchasing power that caused the famine.
Well, or
That is why he won the Nobel.
he didn't call it purchasing power. He called it
Entitlement.
Entitlements.
Yes.
Yeah, but this is a very old point. It's been said in 50s by law
Yes,
and
that's
Indian
what
economists.
But the Food Security Bill is an attempt to address that issue, that particular issue. I wish it's an attempt to address that issue. It's a sign of hope that such a bill has been passed. How well it will be, administered is limited. But your point is, I see in your point that if, as is quite possible technically, only a small portion of the population with efficient labor and machines is actually engaged in the production, how do we ensure the widespread? Because it used to be, let's say maybe only the men were doing this, and of course they would feed their families. But today we get a situation where people who are not in the family don't have any member of the family. And of course that's why the Guaranteed Rural Employment Act provides for only one member of the household. You understand? It's an attempt to assure distribution. It's a very well-written act. The Mahatma Gandhi Guaranteed Rural National Guarantee. It's a very well-written act. This is John Dresser's achievement. He wrote it. He gave up his professorship to look after the implementation. This is a positive step. I'm looking for hopeful signs, right? But I don't say there's light at the end of the tunnel, it's all going to work out. You understand? I'm not.
I think that what silence about the reduction, I think the only thing that's happening is the recession. The only thing that's happening is recession. I mean, the US consumerism is going to go down because of economic recession.
That's the ideal of capitalism, and it worked that way for considerable. You can document this happening. But now what's happening is these people are betting, and they go from money to more money to more money without any production in between. And the amount of money involved in that kind of trading is 10 times as big as the amount of money involved. So that's a bigger problem. That's a problem that has to be solved by institutional reform. That institutional reform could be done still keeping capitalism. That's just cleaning up capitalism back. It's not abolishing capitalism. Do you understand? You could still have capitalism even after you have cleaned that up. But of course the resistance to cleaning it up is coming from the fact that these very fat cats, right, they are paying for the Republican Party. And Mr. Obama is pulling his punches because he wants contributions from people in Wall Street. You understand? We have a a very dangerous situation where money is buying the government directly.
That's what exactly AAP is trying to clean up.
Yeah.
AAP is trying to clean up that very vital
I
thing.
don't want to deny this
We can change the economics of our country.
See, actually, AAP might want it, but the whole problem of hedge funds and
Yes, that's right. That's what I'm talking
futures, it's too big for a party like AAP. And it's you can't clean it up in India. It has to be done in the US on Wall Street first.
Yeah, I agree.
So
Yes, it has to be done there first.
yeah,
I agree.
the
But India itself didn't suffer as much from the 2008 crunch
Yes.
as she might have if she had let in these things.
yeah. But I have another question. The question is that
You're treating me as a wise man almost. But that's understandable.
no, it's a discussion. See, essentially, capitalism is premised on growth.
Yes.
Okay. If the economy doesn't grow, capitalism will collapse.
As such.
Now, if the degrowth movement says capitalism please degrow,
Yes.
why should capitalism degrow? Because it says you're going against my essential
You're using an
fundamentals.
abstraction, capitalism. Yes? Yeah. Right. If enough fat cats and owners become sensitized to these problems and they understand what you understand, right? They'll figure out some way to do it. Maybe.
Soros. Maybe Soros.
Maybe Soros himself. Soros was not an evil man.
No, I'm talking of Soros.
Soros.
George Soros.
Yes, that's an interesting example. Yeah. Yes, he destroyed the currencies of several nations, and now he's trying to save the world with this and that. Yes. Yes.
No, but coming back to this central question I was asking, why would capitalism want to degrow? Because
But
that's
you're
the end
saying
of capitalism.
isn't. Every man who is a capitalist is also a human being. Yeah? Right? It could be that there is more than a capitalist in some of these capitalists. I'll tell you what I think is a serious problem. Let me come to another little point.
So we're coming to another very fundamental issue.
Let me just
Is-
make my
yeah,
other
okay.
point, then we get your fundamental issue. It used to be back in Gandhi's day that the capitalist was the owner and the CEO, Birla. So if he was worried about something, he could spend a heap of money to do it. He didn't have to answer to anybody else. But today, because of the mutual funds, the CEOs are not the owners. And they feel that their moral responsibility is to all these little guys who own their corporation through the mutual funds. You understand? And that way, they lose their sense of responsibility to the world at large. That's a very dangerous situation. It looked like it was democratizing capitalism to have the mutual funds, right? But the actual effect is to increase the level of irresponsibility in the actual managing of funds. So that's a problem. I'm sorry, you wanted to say.
No, it's fine, that's fine. But the question is, the way you're formulating it is the selfish chain a more basic instinct? Or is collective self-preservation a more basic instinct?
I agree. That's a very important one. Have you read the Samuel Bowles and Herbert Gintis, A Cooperative Species?
No.
Are you into experimental economics?
I'm not an economist, actually.
Well, I'll be back and we'll talk about this issue.
Sure.
I think the two big issues today, in my humble opinion, in the development of economic theory, one is the ecological economics coming down the highway. And most of the economics professors are resisting it, but they know it's there. They're getting scared. Nicholas Stern is very worried about it, and so on. They're getting scared. And the other big issue is the human nature issue. It has been a premise, a basic premise, the economic man theory. When the economic man theory was first, it's a little bit implicit in Adam Smith. It's there back there, but it really became the stock and trade with John Stuart Mill. But he did not say that this was the nature of man. It was an arbitrary definition distinguishing economics from other aspects of moral philosophy. Economics was going to treat moral philosophy to the extent that man is a wealth-seeking creature. He did not say that is human nature. He said that's an aspect of human nature. And to the extent that that is true, that is the study of economics. Now what happened was, after economics began to be mathematized in the second half of the 19th century with names that will come to me in a moment, it became a postulate that this is human nature. It's called the economic man premise, and it's there at the beginning in each textbook. That is human nature. Now that premise is being called into question by a field of study called experimental economics. And experimental economics, the simplest form is a game called, is it arbitration? Is that the name of the game? Arbitration. It's a very simple game in a simple form. You know this game?
No.
Oh, good. Something I can teach you. This is great.
Yeah, great.
You have the game master, and you have two players, A and B. Very simple. A puts, the game player explains the game to both players. They both know the rules. I am putting $1,000 at the disposal of A in the form of 10 $100 notes. A will offer a number of these notes, anywhere from 1 to 10, to B. B will either accept the offer or reject the offer. If B accepts the offer, A will keep the rest. If B rejects the offer, neither of them gets any of it. It comes back to me. This game has been played thousands of times in different cultures. If there were economic man premise for the whole truth of human nature, the offer would be won, and it would be accepted. Right? But that is not what happens. The offer is somewhere around 4. And the acceptance rate is, the cutoff rate, the refusal rate is somewhere around 3. B is willing to give up his 3 because he thinks A is a selfish bastard. And the same people who do that are the people who offer more, who offer maybe 5 instead of more. And then there are many variants of this game. If they both know that they're both students, right, then the offer will be 5. They have something, some extra little thing. You see what I mean? If they play, the same 2 players play the game 10 times, and then of course there's variance in the game of how much money is at stake. If more money is at stake, the behavior is a little different than if less money is at stake. So this and other similar games, they're all variants of Prisoner's Dilemma, okay, have been played to show that human nature does not fit. This is quantitative data. Quantitative data. How much is the average offer under this condition, under that condition? You understand? And on the basis of this, a quantitatively demonstrable picture based on experimentation of human nature in this regard is being built up. And there's a very good book by Samuel Bowles and Herbert Gintis, published 2 years ago, called A Cooperative Species. Now I can't come here and tell you, sorry, you have to cut back. I used to do all that.
No, that
I
again,
can't say that, but you can
that
say
should
it.
again actually
You can
lead
say
us. No, this point should again actually lead us to the definition of growth itself.
Yeah.
Is it just about manufacturing? Because manufacturing means raping of the vines. I mean, it's about mining.
Yeah.
It's about just giving away the whole beetle vines as we
Yes,
did in
that's
Costco or in Orissa. It's just about thinking of nothing but manufacturing, because we have to show that in terms of production.
Absolutely.
So is growth just about this? If we can actually redefine the growth concept itself, that it doesn't just include the production and manufacturing, then in that case, everything falls into place.
Well, growth is usually assigned to mean material growth. You're talking about some kind of spiritual factor coming in. I'm all for that.
Not at all. Is happiness a spiritual factor? Is well-being a spiritual factor?
Yes, a spiritual factor. Yes, I would call that spiritual. I'm an atheist. I have no religion. I don't believe in any afterlife. So for me, well-being and happiness are spiritual.
Okay.
The condition of people's spirits. You understand?
Yeah.
And I call that spiritual. Now, to have, here's another thing. there's a distinction been made by many economists, and John Maynard Keynes made it better than anybody else. More, he was very smart guy. And he said, there are two kinds of needs. One is a need that we have regardless, that we feel, regardless of what the others have. We need it no matter what the others have or don't have. So there are certain things we need. We need the vitamins, we need the clothing, whatever we need. We need a certain amount of comfort, whatever, something. And the other is a need which is felt not felt in relation to what the others would call keeping ahead of the Joneses. The first kind of need can be met. The second kind of need is insatiable. Because the more the others have, the more I think I need. That's what has to be attacked.
That's what is a Veblen's thing, conspicuous
That's
purchases and
the
conspicuous.
Gandhian point. That has to be attacked. Gandhi said the world has enough for everyone's need, but not for their greed, not for everyone's greed. That's what has to be attacked. People have to decide, I say you're banal, but you're not easy. For any one climate, any one social thing, situation, 3 shirts are enough. You wear one, you wash one, and you have a bathroom. One is going to be hanging on the line or in the bucket, right? And you have a bag, and you wear one. That's enough. If you choose them carefully, you'll be sexy enough. If you buy them superficially, it's not really me, but I'll get it because it's interesting. Then you'll get a big pile. You'll become a slave of your shirts. You see? But if you choose 3, this is really nice. If you choose 3 really nicely, you'll be sexy enough, which is important. When you're young, especially, you'll be sexy. You won't get married. That's enough. See? That's my view. Now, maybe 3 is the wrong number. Maybe 4. Maybe 5. But you should think about it. And second, choose first. Remember Imelda Marcos, the president of the Philippines, he had 5,000 pairs of shoes? It's crazy. Insane. Yes? So I have 2. And then the sandals hurt my foot, so now I'm just stuck with these. But I think everybody ought to think that. How much do I really need to get on well? How many shirts? How many socks? How many underpants? How much this? How much that? Yeah. If everybody begins to think that way, pretty soon we can begin to nibble into the second problem of the keeping ahead of the Joneses. One area where people are terrible this way is with the smartphone area. Right? They're not happy just to have a phone where they can call anybody in the world. They want to have a phone that seems to be better than somebody else's phone.
It's all market induced, no?
Of course. And capitalism depends on it. Capitalism depends on it. And there's something called
Designing obsolescence.
land obsolescence. They're deliberately making and so on and so forth. These problems all have to be attacked. I agree.
Generating a need which is actually not there.
That's right. Well, in a way, actually not there. The point is, people have to decide en masse that they're not going to worry about that. And India has a potential because of the Gandhian tradition. You see.
So if your income is more than 100 crores, you can be taxed even 80%.
That's what we used to have in the United States. We used to have a top bracket of more than
That we used to have here also up
And
to
then it was
60%, but
retracted.
they have taken it away. So
So
some of us are for it, some of us are against it.
I lived in Hong Kong, and they had a universal flat tax within Hong Kong. It was 18% when I was there. But they had a lot of little special taxes. If you had a car, you paid to the government each year in tax the value of the car.
Even in Singapore.
Yes.
Even in Singapore it is the case.
Yeah,
The value of the tax for a car, when I purchase a car in Singapore,
yeah,
then I pay more than the value of the car as a tax.
yeah.
Additional to that, even the parking tax is there,
Yeah.
and then the timing, if I
And with that
drive
money-
tonight, there's lesser tax to pay.
With that money, the government built the public transport system. No, I didn't know that about Singapore, but that's a good tax.
It's a good way of regulating the traffic impact.
Yeah, yes.
Because during
But
the
then, of
daytime,
course, it means only the rich can have cars.
yeah, they have a red label and another yellow label or something. So the red label people are those who took permission only to drive in the night time, that is 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Oh, really?
So they have lesser tax.
Huh?
The people who want to drive during the 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the daytime,
Uh-huh.
they pay heavy taxes.
And they pay the high
parking
tax.
also.
Oh, what a good law.
So traffic regulation.
A lot
is
of
done
good
in
things
that
going on. Have you been? You've been to Singapore?
Yeah.
I've never been there.
Study through IIM Bangalore.
Interesting.
So taxes reduces consumption.
Pardon?
Not it was
I
a
think
traffic
also
regulation there.
regulations and all.
Pollution regulation, traffic regulation, you're handling multiple things in a single stroke. Just for the tax part of it.
So thank you very much.
Thank
I'm
you very
looking forward
much.
to lunch.
Thank you very much.